we go. So let's fast forward to now. What are your principles of planning now? And I'm interested where they came from as well. Was it just something you kind of picked up yourself, or was it learning from others? So what does it look like for you now?
Yeah. So I'm gonna do two things which are just preemptively defending myself against things that I know people are anti. So one is using the lesson as a frame of, as a period of time. Using the lesson as like a bit of time to talk about. Now, a lesson is not when learning happens. However, it is when teaching does. And to not consider it as a discrete block of time for that reason, I think is madness. Yes, you need long-term plans, medium-term plans that map out these longer journeys. But that hour, let's say an hour, where you've got kids coming from somewhere weird, going to somewhere weird, you know, they come from break or lunch or a lesson on vaudeville or Macbeth or World War II into your classroom, to assume that you could just pick up from where you left off 3 days ago, 2 hours, you know, however long ago, is madness. That you need that structure, those habitualized routines within a lesson that create an emotionally and physically safe but intellectually challenging environment. And there's a level of predictability that's needed for that. You've got 30 hormonal adolescents in front of you that you want to challenge, that you want to get out of their comfort zone 5 times a day. Like, you better make sure you've got a sense of safety around them, which I think comes from that lesson environment, that an air of predictability. They know what they're going to see in that hour. So that's my defense of the lessons, a unit of time. I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking when I do it. I'll just say it now. We'll just do it now, right? Because this was one of the biggest. I've swung 2 ways on this, so this is quite interesting. So pre my kind of mid-career crisis, I was all about planning one lesson, seeing how it went, plan the next lesson, see how it went, and I was all about the discrete unit of time, right? And then I spoke to people who know far more about stuff than me, and I swung completely the other way, and I planned everything out in sequences. So I would sit down and think, I've got 2 weeks to do this. Okay, let's think where the kids need to get to at the end. Let's get the kind of checks for understanding and then map it all out. And I still do that to a large extent and I'll be interested how you kind of think in terms of sequences and then boil it down to lessons, and whether you kind of take a kind of top level view first and then narrow down to the lessons. We'll certainly get to that. That's kind of the approach I'm taking at the moment, a kind of top level view where I'll roughly map out, you know, a week's worth, 2 weeks worth. But then this is where I've swung back to what you're saying now. And I think it is that predictability and that routine, that there will be certain kind of key points that will always appear in the lesson. And whether that's, you know, the retrieval start, or whether that's, you know, a check for understanding at the end or whatever. The only time I'll break that, and it will only be with certain kind of students, is if the kids have been really getting into a task and we haven't had time to finish it, the start of next lesson, I might just say, let's just crack on, because we were loving where we're up to and so on and so forth. But with certain classes, I won't go near that, because they need, as you say, that structure of what to expect. So where I'm at the moment, and again, either come back to this now or pick it up in when you're describing your process, is I'll never just sit down and think, right, I am going to plan lesson 1 of a topic without thinking, where's my kind of long-term goal for this going? But I won't be so kind of bold as I perhaps would have been 3 or 4 years ago, where everything is just like a 100-slide PowerPoint that's going to last me the kind of 2 weeks and we're just going to flow through it all the way. I think I'm shifting back more to thinking, actually, this unit of time that we call a lesson actually is really important for the reasons you've outlined. So that's where I'm at. I don't know if that kind of differs to you at all, Craig.
That sounds like a more articulate version of what I was trying to get across.
Well, I don't know about that.
I agree.
What was your second thing you were going to?
The second thing is in defence of using PowerPoint.
Nice, yes.
Planning is hard. Planning involves lots of thinking, and if I can have something which is going to house my planning, my thinking, my diagrams, my web links, my pictures, I'm going to use it. I don't trust myself to not forget these things in the moment when I've got God knows how many other things to think about when you're in charge of the safety and learning of 30 kids at once. My PowerPoint, it should be mostly blank. It should be sparse. But there's prompts there. There's cues. It would be alongside a whiteboard. I'm not advocating just for that. Something that can hold a permanent piece of information. I think is really important. I'm not animating. I'm not clicking through, sitting at my desk, touching everything. Kids should see me doing the maths. But also thinking about leadership and space outside of my classroom and me time. It can be saved and shared. And if these routines and structures you've got are across a department, then it's quite easy, or not easy, but it's easier to pick it up and then have a less experienced other deliver a quality of lesson that is good. I really hope that anyone that has worked under me when I was head of department or that's working with me now never has to write a book called How I Wish I Taught Maths. Never has to have this conversation where they regret all the things that they used to do. So by having a thing, an artifact, a lesson that I can save, share, distribute, I hope will help prevent all those mistakes that we made happening to these other people as they're coming through the start of their careers now.
Oh, this is good. Well, three things on this. I love this. So the first thing is just a very quick story. I don't think this happens as much these days, but I'm old enough to have been kind of teaching back in the day whenever the kind of smartboard revolution was coming in. So everyone was getting the new Promethean boards or smartboards or whatever. And my first lad I mentored when he was an NQT, he'd come off his first placement and he planned all his lessons in smartboard format because they had smartboards at his school, and you know what's going to come here, right? Our school was all Promethean, so he couldn't use his lessons. It was all a waste of time. So for that reason, I've always been a PowerPoint fan because you can, you use it anywhere. You can use it on pretty much, Apple device, whatever. Second thing is I'm a massive PowerPoint. I do everything in PowerPoint. Again, with the caveats that you've said, I hate the click through. I've made all those mistakes. I should have said that at the start, actually. That was another huge mistake. I used to spend hours animating things, left, right, and center, animating these written solutions. And I'll tell you the worst one, though, right? And this was my pride and joy. I had a PowerPoint on transformations where I'd animated like the tracing paper. It's still on TES. You can still get it now. My name's attached all over it. You animate like a tracing paper turning around. It took me bloody forever to do it. I was so happy with it. Absolutely useless because that isn't what the kids do when they're, rotating. Yeah. They're not clicking next and, something magically happening. So yeah, absolute waste of time. But just on final two things on PowerPoint. To go back to what we're saying about mapping things out in the sequence, I'm a big fan of using slide sorter view mode. So you can see all, getting a load of blank slides, clicking them there, just chucking tasks in, chucking questions in and so on, and then moving things around, just dragging one slide to the other. So you've got this kind of holistic view of it. So I really like the slide sorter view mode for just piecing together lessons and piecing together sequences of lessons. I got that from Gemma Sherwood. I really like that. And my final thing for you, Craig, just a question. Have you not been tempted to join the OneNote revolution? Because everyone's talking this. I think we're old school with PowerPoint now, right? Everyone's talking OneNote. Are you not there?
I've got it. And I keep hearing people talk about it. And I really hope that, I'm hoping maybe they'll just stop. Maybe we'll talk about this in 10 years' time and we'll say what fools we were to use PowerPoint. I don't know. What I've not seen is I've not seen people use it. I've seen people talk about it. I've not seen it in action to convince me otherwise yet. It was during lockdown I was getting a bit convinced because it was a way for people to house and share and dump information down remotely. I've not seen it fix a problem that I currently have.
Yes.
So I'm not there yet.
I think where I'm at with it, if you didn't have a static, non-interactive whiteboard in your classroom, I think it can be useful just for the flexibility that you're not having to, fit everything on one slide, like you would on a PowerPoint and then skip to the next slide. You've got the more kind of infinite kind of scroll perspective thing with it. I'm the same with you. I'm not 100% sold, but I am a little bit tempted. Just like I'm tempted to buy a Mac just because everyone's telling me a Mac's better than PCs. Similar, I'm tempted just to dabble with OneNote just because everyone tells me it's great. But
I think linked to my last point around sharing it and saving it and using it for others, unless everyone else can use OneNote,
true.
I want everything that I plan to be able to be picked up by someone else relatively simply. So it might be the case that if that revolution happens, then I will. But for now, I think if I go into schools at the moment, I teach a lesson, I will then dump this lesson over to people. If they don't know how to use OneNote, there's a waste there at the moment. So it might be great. At the moment, I think it would create more problems for me than it would solve.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I keep saying the last thing on PowerPoint, but I just wanted to say this as well. Again, it's a classic thing, right? People slag off PowerPoint left, right, and centre, and of course, you can use it terribly, as we've described here, right? You can pre-animate everything, click, 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 click. No flexibility, no dynamism, no responsiveness at all. Or you can simply use it as a tool to kind of write on, save on, record things on. Just use the things that you wouldn't be able to do if you didn't have it available, like, grab an exam question, paste it on there and then add to it and so on and so forth. So it's the most obvious thing, but I just wanted to say it. Of course you can use PowerPoint terribly, but of course you can use it well as well. So that's all I wanted to say on that. And you were saying, Craig, before obviously we dive into your process, was there anything else about this kind of overall principles of planning you wanted to talk us through?
Right. So it's natural principles rather than me defending myself before the attacks have even started. I won't go into the whole cognitive science part of all this. I think people have read and heard enough about it, but using templates and defaults. So not just using PowerPoint, I'll use the same structure. I'll use my master slides. It will look the same. I'll have the same routines in every single lesson, most of the time. It saves me time, saves my headspace, it saves the kids' headspace. It links back to being predictable. It links back to leading across a department or across a school. The more routinized things you have, the more effective and targeted your CPD can be. And it gives me a chance, by not changing that, to master it, to master delivering this in this format. So I will keep things as routinized as possible.
Is now a good time for you to tell us what's on those master slides, or is that better saved till later, Craig?
Let's. No, we can go through it. So if I click now on my, I've written some notes for this because I've got the lesson that we're going to talk through later as well. If I click down to add a slide, I've got a few options. I've got one that says do now, one that says exposition, one that says modelling, one that says mini whiteboard, one that says EPP, which is set up for an example problem pair, one says practice, one says review, one says extension, one says exit ticket, and then one says, it almost spells twerps, but not quite. We might come to what that is later.
Wow. God, this is organised. I love this. These are all pre-existing templates. This is good. You tell us a little bit what's on them.
Oh, nothing. There's a bit in the top right-hand corner. Let's say the do now one. Top right-hand corner will say do now.
Nice.
Top left-hand corner will say lesson objective. And when I click on master, I can just type in whatever it is, and then it will populate all the slides with that lesson objective. And then it's white space and a blank, and it's a box.
I'll tell you something. It might be kicking off here, Craig, with this. I have a bit of a thing about this, right? So so I see the extreme version, and not a thing about having these templates. I think it's a really smart idea. If we just spend a second just talking about lesson objectives. So I see, I watch hundreds of lessons. I'm very, very lucky. And I'm a bit obsessed with what kind of boards look like and stuff. And you see some where the actual space for the teaching has been reduced so much because you've got lesson objectives, school logo, date, keywords down the side, some bloody clip art of something, and then you're down to about 20% of the space to actually do some teaching. So and again, I'm not saying this is a criticism, I'm just intrigued. Do you have lesson objective on every slide throughout the lesson, and what's the thinking behind that?
It'll just say, for example, this lesson, it says expanding and factorizing, or percentages of amounts. And I guess it's partly if there's a really key word for the lesson, I want that to be just as common as possible. But it's taken up a really small amount of space at the very top. It's not saying we're learning to do. It's maybe a 3-word title. Just so, I don't know. I've got a hunch that it's useful to have some keywords that they can always see. They're always like, oh, we're doing that today, we're doing that today. And I might point to it throughout the lesson, or if they're trying to articulate something, I might be able to point to that word if they want them to use it in a sentence. It could go, and I don't think it'll make much of a difference. But
Okay, no, I'm just intrigued
Yeah.
now. But the bottom line is your slide masters, they're essentially blank, but it's just a way that you can then kind of populate on top of with the content. That'd be right.
it's interesting. It's the first bit of feedback I get anytime I go and teach at the moment in one of my schools, and I ask people, what did you think of it? Well, the first thing is always, I loved how blank it was. Okay, well, I'll take that as a compliment. But like you say, it's just bizarre that people fill it with distractions.
And it's you know what, I
That's
equated
all.
it's the same thing with the need to fill silences with words, right? It's the same thing. It's this
Yeah.
notion, just like cram everything, more content the better. And it took me 12 years to realise that that's not not the smartest idea. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so that's kind of principle number one. Would that be right? You kind of templates. Okay, well, what have you got for number two?
Number two, prepare for the unplannable. Like you just the sense that you cannot plan, you cannot script out 60 minutes, right? You need to be responsive at some point in it. A lesson plan is an oxymoron, right? A lesson and a plan, you can control some parts of it, but at some point you have to let go. But you can prepare yourself for that. You can set yourself up for asking really granular questions so that you can respond to the right bit at the right time. Think about like comedy improvisers. They rehearse, they have exercises, they have routines, they get their improvisational muscles ready. Teachers need to do the same thing. You need to just be ready for a bit where you're going to be on your toes and you're going to be responding to what you get, and have the systems in place to be able to do that. So don't think you can map out the full 60 minutes. Be ready to respond.
It's really interesting that I tell you what, I'm going to comment on every single thing you say here, Craig, because this is fascinating. This has got 6 hours written all over it just to warn people. I think I 100% agree. I think you're right. I think it's easier the more experience you have to do that. And what really intrigued me, I had Emma Turner, her primary specialist, on the Tips for Teachers podcast a while ago, and she was talking about something similar here, about how what she does when she trains novice teachers up and to kind of help them prepare for the unplannable. She says, let's kind of try and plan a bit in. So here's a question. If kids struggle with this, what are we going to do? If they do well with this, what are we going to do? And what she does, and I thought this was really smart, if they struggle with this, she'll then say to the teachers, let's say it's on PowerPoint, on the next slide, get your kind of follow-up question that you'd ask, or get your next example that you do, or your next model to help the kids if they struggled. And if they haven't struggled with it, actually make a thing of saying to the kids, oh, I'd planned this, but we don't need this because you've got this in the moment. And it's almost like a bit of a motivational thing. So the teachers go in with like a 50-slide PowerPoint or whatever, but they're not using all the slides. They've just got them up their sleeve. Now, a more experienced teacher might not need to have that physical thing there because they might be able to come up with the questions or the models on top. But I thought that was quite a nice little thing for 2 reasons for less experienced teachers. One, so you've got the physical thing there, so you don't have to try and think of it on the spot. But also, I like that little thing of that almost kind of motivational piece for the kids. I don't know if you've any thoughts on that at all.
Well, she's stolen the things I'm going to talk about later, 100%. And I also think if you are more experienced, dump them in anyway. Because if you've got a tricky class or something, you can go, you have done so well today. We were going to do these as well, but you don't even need to. Put
It's
it in.
good.
And
It's good.
Yeah, we'll talk about praise and emotion in a bit, I think.
Brilliant. Love it.
But that all sounds like good advice. Yeah.
Okay. No, have you got any more principles?
I've got 2 more.
Okay.
One is hope for the best, plan for the worst, which is that I'm just going to assume that nothing I say will be listened to or understood. If I've got 30 students smiling at me, nodding at me, for an explanation that I spent 5 hours crafting, I am not taking anything for granted. I am going to make sure that they are producing artifacts for their thinking whenever possible. I'm not going to rely on them thinking about what I want them to be thinking about. So you see it with cold calls sometimes now as well. Like, oh, right class, I'm going to ask somebody to work out the area of this rectangle, and Craig, what do you think it is? Then you see these graphs that say all the kids are thinking until you put the name on the end. Oh, are they?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. But if you get some mini whiteboards out and you say, right, class, here's a question, I want you all to write down what the answer is, well, then I know if they're thinking or not. Yeah. Like, even think, pair, share. Oh, we'll talk about twerks. I want to move away from think, pair, share. I've got a new acronym,
Go on.
and it's think, write, pair, rewrite, share.
Oh, there's
So
a twist. I was nodding there, thinking, yeah, I love the write bit. You've thrown me with this rewrite. Okay, let me write that down. So we think, write,
pair,
rewrite,
share.
share.
So think about it, commit to an answer. What are you going for? Okay, now with the person next to you, compare. What have they got? What have you got? Now, 30 seconds. If you want to change your answer or make it better, you can. Okay, now board's up. Now show me. Think, write, pair, rewrite, share. It's going to take the world by storm.
Well, it is. It is. I've got a question though for you. Right, this is good. I love it. I'm 95% on board here. My only thing would be, again, I guess it depends on context. What's the argument for not seeing what the kids have got before that, just to get that proper check for understanding before they have?
100% you can. You can do think, write, share, pair, rewrite, share. Just it flows nicely. Yeah, by all means.
Think, write, share, pair, rewrite, share. That is good. That is good. Okay. Yeah, love it. And just on that, again, we could talk all day just to pick up on something you just said, and then we can get back to this principle. The cold call one's a really interesting one, right? I always make this point, that cold call, the big argument for cold call, apart from the fact it's speedy and it's better for kind of verbal responses, longer verbal responses perhaps than whiteboards, is that as long as you do everything you're supposed to do with cold call, ask the name at the end, give you enough thinking time and so on, that every child in the class has got an incentive to think. But it's just not true. It's just not true. Like and let's tell you two scenarios where it's not true. One, just any classroom. If you've got 30 kids in the class, kids are just gambling there. They're thinking, it's a bit of a probability exercise. Got a 1 in 30 chance of him asking me. If I get unlucky and he does, I'll just start my thinking there and then. And you can see it. Because the kids are like, oh, God, he's asked me. For God's sake, right, what was the answer? And they just start thinking. And then the other thing is as well, and I always make this point, if a kid's got in early on in the lesson with an answer, they can just have a breeze for the rest of the lesson because the chance of the teacher coming back to them is minimal. Whereas I know whiteboards are becoming a bit of a cliche these days, but if the kids know that at regular points in the lesson, they're going to have to show you their answers. And if they hold up a blank board, they're the first child that's going to be asked.
Yeah.
It has to be better, right? It has to be.
Yeah, at the risk of taking a detour and us never talking about the lesson.
Yes.
Something really interesting happened over lockdown, people that taught over lockdown, because suddenly they were teaching in front of a screen to 30 just blank, 2 initials and that was it. And people suddenly realised they had no idea what anybody was thinking.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, whiteboard.fi or using polls on Teams to get mass participation took off.
Yeah.
Back in the classroom, you got people nodding at you, smiling at you, writing notes down, giving you all these indicators that they're thinking. And in reality, you've got just as much guarantee as you did when they had a blank screen behind an MS Teams. And so those means of mass participation, yes, it's getting a bit cliche. Yes, my colleagues can take the mick out of me for talking about mini whiteboards again. But what does the job better? What exists at the moment that gets 30 people, that holds them to account for the thinking you want them to be doing? I've not seen it in a classroom. I just haven't. So until someone says do something better, to be responsive, you need as much data as possible. At the moment, that is mini whiteboards.
Yeah, I'm with you. Just on this principle then, Craig, so this, I've got it down here, TWPRS, or potentially with that other S somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
What kind of heading did this principle come under? Just so we can kind of recap all 4 of them when you.
This was just under it was called hope for the best, plan for the worst. It's just it's assuming that they're not thinking at all.
Yes.
So where possible, produce an artifact.
Love it.
So not think, pair, share. Think, write, pair, share. But also that rewrite gives them a chance to actually. Again, you're holding them to account for changing their mind.
I love that.
They have to do the rewriting.
I love that.
So wherever you can, have them produce an artifact for what you ask them to think about.
Love it. Love the artifact as well. I'm going to chuck that in. That sounds better. I see data and stuff. Artifact smells better. Love that. All right. What's principle 4 then, Craig? And then we'll just recap each of these 4.
I've got 4, which is just to explain the why behind all this stuff.
Yeah.
So if you've got a do now, why are we doing this? You've got the modelling, why are we doing this? We're using how many whiteboards, why are we doing this? So I'm not going to talk about that through bit, as in like me telling the kids why I would do it, but we'll talk a bit about the why, but justify it to a point. There are some things like, I mean, you said that it was Emma Turner talking about that praise points. I wouldn't say that to the kids. I want to keep a little bit back of the ways I'm tricking them into working hard. But the rationale behind a lot of the lesson, I want to share with them. I need them to buy into the why, because they're going to understand a bit more why I need certain behaviours from them at certain times as well. It's not because I'm horrible, it's because I care about their learning.
It'll be no surprise, Joe, I'm going to have to comment on this as well. But the why's a biggie, right? I'm obsessed with lots of things, but the starts of lessons in particular. Like I love watching the starts of lessons, and I have a little exercise I play when I'm lucky enough to watch lessons, which I am a lot these days. Is I just, whatever's going on at the start, whether it's retrieval do now, prerequisite check, settler, whatever it may be, I just pick a child at random and I just say, why is Sir asking you to do this, or why is Miss asking you to do this? And the range of answers is incredible, but they tend to kind of form around just so Sir can do the register, just something to keep us busy, just blah, blah, blah. Like, it's never, he's asking us this because it's going to come into play later on in the lesson, or he's asking us this because we did it a few months ago and he's making sure we don't forget it. It's never, ever, ever that. And I just think the start of the lesson, and I know you're going to dig deep into the start of the lesson, but it's dead time in a lot of lessons that I see. And I think it's not going to solve a lot of problems, but if you can at least get the kids to realize why you're doing what you're doing, it feels like it's at least a kind of step in the right direction, if that makes sense. But again, I don't want to derail. I know we're going to talk do nows in a little bit.
Yeah.
And just recap those 4 principles, Craig, just for listeners, if that's okay.
Yeah. Have templates and have defaults that you do for your lesson, and have them unashamedly. Like the more routine you can have, the more the maths can take centre stage of your lessons. Prepare for the unplannable. You cannot script every single second, so make sure you're ready to be responsive throughout the lesson. Hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Assume that they're not going to listen to you or understand anything that you're saying. So where possible, have them produce an artifact, as many of them as possible, for accountability, and explain the why behind all of this, so that there's more of a buy-in, there's more of an implicit motivation, and that it helps with behaviour management, because you can give a reason about their learning for why you need certain behaviours at different points in the lesson.
Love it. Absolutely.